attracted to that continent by the scent of oil when China first became an oil importer in the year 1993. Years before, China had been active in Africa as a seller of goods and services, including military equipment. In the Sudan, for example, having sold the government military equipment ranging from tanks to fighter aircraft, Chinese companies are building bridges, roads, and government offices, a hydroelectric dam, and an oil refinery. Oil importing countries pay homage to diversity of supply as the best protection against disruption from a single source or grouping of sources. They may also seek diversity among the types of fuel consumed, and diversity as to how these fuels make their way from exporter to importer. Finally, some importers may seek to develop equity oil abroad, that is, oil that they actually own, reasoning that equity oil is a secure source of supply and would always be available. However, equity oil does not protect the owner against domestic violence in host country, disruption of supply routes, or high pricing. China's growing dependence on imported oil to meet fuel requirements of an expanding transportation system, especially privately owned automobiles, has forced that country to seek supply through diversity of supply. In other words, China is acting no different than any other oil importing country by taking actions deemed necessary to support and protect anticipated growth rates. China has embraced all three options: equity oil, diversity of supply, and diversity among fuels consumed, with varying success. To illustrate failures, U.S. domestic policies helped turn China away from attempt to buy Unocal in an effort to buy a share in the giant oil field in the Caspian Sea called Kashagan. Chinese oil companies continue to prowl the world, often overpaying what they secure and setting precedents that international oil companies cannot meet. China's position of non-interference in domestic affairs plays well in Chad and in Somalia, where oil deals have recently been struck. In Chad, for example, China has plans to build the country's first oil refinery and new roads. But in some, China follows its own way of doing business in Chad and other countries, particularly those in Africa, although the jury is still out as to whether China will be successful. Where does the oil come from that they import? Mainly from the Middle East. Why from the Middle East? Because that's where the reserves are, and production follows reserves. China can take some comfort in diversity of sources it has secured, yet it cannot avoid the dependence on the Middle East. China continues to dominate in its search of its going out strategy by looking for oil all around the world, but it always comes back to the Middle East. China is not alone as it faces the future, a future of uncertainty. Let me conclude with this simple message. It is perhaps ironic that in an age where the pace of technological change is almost overwhelming, the world will remain dependent for this decade and the next at least on essentially the same forms of fossil energy, oil, coal, and natural gas that fueled the 20th century. The question remains, however, at what price and in what volumes will these fuels be available? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abel, for that really very thoughtful and comprehensive presentation. It's a great introduction to the topic, I think. And we turn now to Dr. Colonel David Finkelstein, or Colonel Doctor, I'm never quite sure which it is. Anyway, he used to shoot people for a living, now he talks to them. And, David is at the Center for Naval Analysis, where he directs Project Asia. He's also recently taken CNA away from its focus on the Navy, the People's Liberation Army Navy, and the People's Liberation Army in general, and into a broader focus on trying to understand China from the inside out. And in this effort, I'm not sure whether he persuaded or he bamboozled, what's the word?
The latter is probably.
All right, well, anyway, created a new center for China Studies at CNA, which is operating on a shoestring, but highly effectively in holding about a monthly meeting, sometimes more often, which is attracting a lot of attention and I think contributing greatly to discussion of China in this city. I'm not going to go over Colonel Dr. or Dr. Colonel Finkelstein's distinguished biography in the military and otherwise. I would just say that he is a much sought after speaker at government institutes and more broadly, and I think we're very fortunate to have enticed him to the World Affairs Council.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction. I'm originally from New York City, and people always ask me, why did I join the Army at the height of the Vietnam War? And the answer I always tell them is that, at least in the Army, you got to shoot back. So, I'm delighted to be here this evening with the World Affairs Council. The role that your organization is playing in informing the American public on the critical issues of foreign affairs has never been more critical and more important than it is today. So as a citizen, I thank you for that. I'd like to also thank Heidi Shue, who has been tolerant beyond the pale of tolerance as I try to rearrange my schedule to be with you tonight. And of course, it's always a pleasure to be with Ambassador Freeman and Bob from CSIS, so I'm in great company this evening. Now, with Bob and Chaz here to talk about China and oil, I figured that there was very little that I could add to the topic. So what I decided to do, therefore, is to hijack the issue of China's search for energy abroad, the main focus of tonight's panel, and offer that Beijing's search for energy overseas is emblematic of China's growing footprint overseas. And while this is a blazing flash of the obvious, it's always good to remind ourselves of blazing flashes of the obvious. And so to start with, my big blazing flash of the obvious for the evening is this. For the first time in modern history, China's national interests are now global, not merely regional. This is an unprecedented state of affairs that is principally the result, as we know, of China now having a global economy. And as we know, in the beginning of the early 1980s, China's foreign economic strategy was based heavily on inviting foreign investors into China, the invite-in strategy, as they call it. But of course, we also know that by the mid to late 1990s, it became clear to China's economic planners that it was time for Chinese corporations to go abroad. Hence, in the year 2001, Vice Premier Wu Bangguo gave a formal title to this policy when he declared the going out strategy. And in this new phase of China's economic development, the Chinese central government called for developing homegrown international corporations that would, one, invest and operate abroad, to include making foreign acquisitions, two, marketing Chinese brands on the international marketplace. I have a daughter in college. I can't believe, I think every college dorm in America has a high-R refrigerator. It's amazing. But that's another lecture. So two, marketing Chinese brands as international brands in the marketplace. And three, apropos of tonight's session, going out to procure the raw materials overseas that a growing Chinese economy at home demands. So today, the number of Chinese firms and PRC workers overseas has reached really hitherto unimaginable numbers. Consider the following. In 2006, Beijing claimed their own statistics, argue with them if you like, but by their own statistics,